Hi, my name is Nicola, and I'm the Assistant Curator of Leeds and Social History for Leeds Museums and Galleries. This morning, as it's December, I'm going to talk to you about pantomime and some of the related items in our museum collections. Pantomime has been a popular tradition in Britain for over 2 centuries. For many children, it can be their introduction to attending the theatre, and they are often an event for the whole family. While the stories differ and there are increasingly modern interpretations, some basics stay the same. There will always be 2 sides, good and evil. The good is usually represented by a young, innocent central character, while the main evil character is usually older, dark, and greedy or jealous. In most pantomimes, there will often be an animal sidekick. Think Dick Whittington's cat or Jack's cow. The script is usually tailored to 2 audiences, with children enjoying an innocent story of good triumphing over evil, while the adults are often treated to jokes that fly over the heads of the younger crowd. There is some dispute over what was one of the first pantomimes in Leeds, but one suggestion appears to be a 1792 production of Bluebeard at the Old Theatre Royal. Bluebeard is one of those titles that seems to have slipped into obscurity, but it appears to have been based on a French folk tale dating back to the late 17th century. The general plot is about Bluebeard, or more accurately, the struggle of his current wife to stop herself from suffering the same fate as his former wives who he murdered. While some of the classic pantomimes we enjoy today do have a darker side, Bluebeard seems much darker than most, which probably explains why it is no longer a staple on the pantomime circuit. Although the story itself is French, many adaptations in the 19th and early 20th century moved the story to the Ottoman Empire. An earlier iteration of pantomime in Leeds, thanks to the research of staff in the Leeds Local and Family History Library, suggests that in 1778 the pantomime entertainment of Harlequin's Jacket would be appearing in the city's theatre. A lot of the traditions of pantomime are from earlier forms of theatre, including the Commedia dell'arte of Italy. Harlequin was a popular character in this form of theatre, which was largely performed between the 16th and 18th centuries. It also took off in France, and in England inspired the popular Punch and Judy shows, alongside inspiring pantomimes. Many early pantomimes had a harlequinade, which was a slapstick, clownish-led piece of the show. I could go much more in depth about the history of pantomime, but will instead move to talk about a few of the objects in our collection that relate to pantomimes in the city. The main focus will be a small number of objects from the early 20th century. As with many of our older objects, we sometimes find that they raise as many questions as they answer. One such set of objects relates to a Harriet Elliot or Shaw. All we really knew when we received the donation was that the items were donated by a relative and that they related to her time featuring in pantomimes at the Leeds Grand Theatre. The earliest item we have is a picture of a 15-year-old Harriet dressed in what appears to be a pantomime costume in 1905. Sadly, we don't know anything else, such as which theatre or production she was featuring in. What it does confirm, however, is that she is probably the same Harriet who appears in the 1891, 1901 and 1911 censuses, living with her family in Hunslet, and who was born in 1890 and lived until 1976. On the 1911 census, she was still listed as Harriet Shaw, with her occupation being a cap maker. She then appears later on the 1939 register that was published as war approached. Here she has become Harriet Elliot, married to Ernest, and her occupation is unpaid domestic duties, still living in the Hunslet area. The next item we have jumps forward in time to 1914. This is an employment contract for the Grand Theatre and Opera House, Leeds, dated November 26, 1914, and is for Harriet Elliot to be employed as an extra ballet lady for the pantomime season 1914-15. The name change suggests her wedding took place somewhere between 1911 and 1914. Again, with some research, we've managed to identify that this pantomime was most likely a version of Robinson Crusoe, not performed at the Grand since the 1904 season. The production was directed by Walter Rignold, and rather than having a principal boy and principal girl, both roles were taken on by female actors, most likely one of the adaptations necessary due to the outbreak of war. The cast included big names from the music hall circuit. Sadly, I've not managed to find any mention of Harriet in relation to the cast or pantomime reviews, but as her role was extra ballet lady, it is not really a surprise that her name was not more prominent. At least the survival of the contract confirms that, as well as being a cat maker, she was also an accomplished performer. Perhaps the most interesting inclusion on the cast list is the animal impersonator. George Alley was born George Bolingbroke in around 1866 and died April 26, 1947. He began his acting career in London pantomimes and was probably born in England. He headed to America where he took on various roles, and by 1892 he returned to England to tour with Buster Brown, which had been a successful production in America. He played Buster's canine sidekick and was so successful he became the second most important character in the show. After that, he remained in England doing various pantomimes, which is presumably how he came to be at the Grand. Although the Leeds Mercury, which names him as a successful animal impersonator, implies that he is travelling from America to take on the role. Just a few years later, he appeared in the original 1922 Peter Pan film adaptation, playing both the crocodile and Nana the dog. Next, we have a letter sent to Harriet asking her to visit E. Rogers as soon as possible about the Rosa Opera Company, sent on grand-headed notepaper. Again, this one's a bit of a mystery. Was this about a part? Was it about a visit to watch an opera? What we do know is that the Rosa Opera Company was set up in 1873 by the German musician and conductor Rosa and his British wife. The idea was for them to bring English language opera to London and the provinces. The company ran until 1960, long after Rosa's death, and featured around 150 different operas. As you can see from the programme we have for the company in our collections, rather than just putting on one show per location, when they arrived in the city they brought multiple different shows. The company showcased work for a variety of composers, including operetta from established names such as Gilbert and Sullivan, alongside supporting new composers. In 1997, the company was revived. Another document tells us that Harriet was once again working at Leeds Grand Theatre for the pantomime season in 1922-23. By this time, she's been married a few years and will be around 32 years old. She has also moved up from being extra ballet lady to a second ballet lady, presumably a promotion from her earlier contract. Again, we have little other information, but after looking on the British Newspaper Archive, we know that the production that year was Aladdin, which hadn't been on at the Grand since 1907. A review from the Yorkshire Post in December 1922 really highlights the universality of the pantomime experience by explaining, yes, it is an old story, but repetition does not destroy the glamour. For at Christmas time, with its message of goodwill, are we not at one with the children in their appreciation of the romance of pantomime? Interestingly, the review also mentions how the first night went off without a real hitch during the entire 4-hour performance, but they suggest a little trimming might be appreciated to make sure that the audience can make their last trams, trains and buses home. Aladdin is still a popular pantomime choice for today, although of course the most famous version of the story nowadays is the Disney animated film from 1992. Sadly, at this time we have not managed to recover much more history of Harriet and her involvement in pantomimes in Leeds, but hopefully we have again given you a bit of an insight into some of the challenges we face trying to recover some of the stories of those who are buried in our social history collections. It's also nice to be able to see pictures of Harriet in costume, as in the census, where most ordinary people are best documented, her theatrical and dance skills remain hidden.